Well, welcome everybody to part 3 of our MacArthur Q&A series. I'm Amanda Williams, and here with me is Jim Zobel, and we are both historians here at the MacArthur Memorial. And the MacArthur Memorial receives an amazing amount of questions on social media about MacArthur every single month, and we can't respond to all of those questions. So if you ever have a really pressing research concern, you need to email us or use the research form on our website. But we do like to host a few of these Q&A sessions every year just to answer some of the more popular questions that people submit. And we always have to make sure, though, that we have sources that will help us answer those questions. So keep submitting your questions. We enjoy hosting these sessions, and we'll get right into it because we have a number of questions for Jim to answer today.
It's nice to finally meet you in person.
It is. It's really nice to be
never met
together.
before.
Yeah, this is a new format. I've never met him before. All right. So we're going to get right into it because we said we were only going to do 6 or 7, but we're actually going to answer maybe double that. So let's go for it. So first question, what type of relationship did the general have with J. Edgar Hoover? And are there any records of correspondence between them or any face-to-face meetings or mutual friends?
We have the correspondence between them. There's only a few pieces that I've been able to find over the years. There's one that Hoover writes to MacArthur in 45. Of course, everything prior to 42 all gets destroyed. So there could have been a lot of correspondence from the 30s. Because in that letter from 45, Hoover talks about they had a very close association in the 30s. And I can see that, especially like with the bonus march when they were worried about all the communists. I imagine they're using the FBI, to investigate a lot of these people that they were looking at. And then during the war, FBI agents are sent to MacArthur's command to help with certain elements of, counterintelligence, espionage, things like that. Because during the occupation as well, FBI goes to Japan to work on treason cases. There's a case with this guy, Kawakita. I'm not really sure what it's all about.
Japanese American?
Yeah, something like that. And so Hoover will write him all the time. And we know that MacArthur writes him back, but we don't have copies of those letters. Usually MacArthur would keep a carbon of them, but he didn't to Hoover. And it makes you wonder, who does he not keep a carbon with, and who does he keep a carbon with?
Right.
But Hoover will always say, thanks for your letter. I appreciate you writing me, because I think when Hoover had been at the Bureau 35 years in 52, MacArthur wrote him a letter of congratulations, and it meant a lot to him. So they did know each other, and they do work with each other as far as the FBI helping out both SWAPA and SCAP. But that's all we know.
Okay. Yeah. And you've got the book in the archives, Hoover's, is it a memoir that he signed and gave to MacArthur?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Did any of the presidents who took office after MacArthur's death, other than Nixon, meet or have correspondence with the general?
So that'd be Ford, and then Carter, and then Reagan. And I don't think we do. I mean, I've never seen any kind of correspondence from Ronald Reagan. We have all his correspondence is cataloged in the computer, and I've never come across anything like that. And when Joe was doing it, Joe was the guy cataloging a lot of stuff. He would have pointed that out. That hey, I found this letter from Reagan. I think somebody had said in that question that they talked about Ford was on the House Appropriations Committee and probably had written MacArthur, but he doesn't. Ford writes Gene, and as well Reagan writes Gene. Jimmy Carter never does, so we know that they know her, because they had meetings with her, throughout that time in the 70s and the 80s as well. But I don't think anybody after Nixon does. No.
Okay. All right. If the general was elected in 1952 instead of Eisenhower, can you think of 3 people who might serve in cabinet or cabinet level positions, and what type of position? And the person that asked this question was saying they were leaning towards Eisenhower as Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense, and General Whitney as Chief of Staff.
Yeah, I can see Whitney as a Chief of Staff. I think he would have brought in Hugh Casey, his engineering officer, because Casey just had this mind that could basically, like an engineer, look at it and I'm going to solve this. Casey goes on to take over the New York subway system, after the war. And as well, even though he was an engineer, they would get into, like when they first landed at Lingayen, everything's such a mess that MacArthur just says, Casey, you got to organize this. And he comes in and organizes everybody. So I can see people like that. He was also people like Frank Ross McCoy, who was on the Far East Commission and as well had been a general in World War One. But Kenneth Royal, who was, I think he was the Secretary of the Army or something like that during that period of the occupation. A lot of these people that MacArthur works with during that occupation period that are civilians in government. I think he would have looked a lot to them as well, because he does have some good allies in that sense. But I think a few of them at least would have been Army officers. But I think they would have, like I said, with Casey, I think they would have been engineers. Because these guys,
Sverdrup.
Sverdrup. Yeah, sure.
Do you think Eisenhower?
You don't know.
I don't know that Eisenhower would have said yes.
That's right. But I don't know if if MacArthur would have even asked him. Yeah, that's a difficult one.
Or perhaps as like one of those UN ambassadors or an ambassador at large. I could see Eisenhower generating a lot of goodwill.
Well, because he
in
does
a role like that.
MacArthur does go to Eisenhower after he comes home from Korea, and he goes to him and says, you're the only ones the Russians
respect.
Yes.
Right.
And so, and MacArthur, as we know, when Eisenhower leaves him, they're not having a good relationship, but MacArthur puts on his efficiency report, this is the best officer in the Army. So, even though they've got that personality thing going, I think MacArthur probably would have said, okay, I can use him.
He's pragmatic. This guy's skilled. Yeah. I can use him.
Yeah.
I was also thinking maybe Dewey. The politician,
Thomas E. Dewey,
maybe Attorney General, because I think he had been like Manhattan DA. He had been busting crime, syndicate stuff like that. So I don't know, unless it would have been like, look, you ran for president so many times and failed.
Yeah,
we don't need that here. And then I also thought Claire Booth Luce.
Wow.
Because by this point you have women generally.
Right.
You have one or two women in a cabinet. And I was thinking, who would MacArthur have picked? What woman does he seem to have
respects her
contact?
probably more than anybody.
He likes her.
Yeah.
And so I could see her as some cabinet member. But it was an interesting question.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it much, really, until you said that. But yeah.
Okay. All right, next question. How many combat engagements did MacArthur personally participate in prior to 1919?
Well, there's the Philippines in 03, when he gets in that scrap on Guimaras Island, and then Veracruz, which is 1914, and then Luneville Baccarat, that's the first sector they get into. He's on the Richecourt and the Seiche raids. There at the Champagne, we know he's in the Alabama lines, right up front when the Germans come in and basically kick them out of that front line, and then they go retake them. At the Ourk River, we know he's all over the place because even Bill Donovan talks about MacArthur has a car then, and he's just driving all over the battlefield, even though the Germans can see anywhere a car is going. Yeah. He's all over the place. And then at the last bit of that Ourk River, when he takes over the 84th Brigade, he leads that 117th Engineer Regiment in the drive against the Germans. And then at Samiel, he's first one in over the wall, carrying a rifle.
Carrying a rifle.
Yeah, that's what, because they put out the word before the battle went off that everyone would remove their rank insignia, and so he was like, just like anybody, just like anybody else, and that's what Perret says about that. I've seen about the insignia, but that's the only one I've seen, where he says that, and I don't know where that comes from, but that makes sense, like you just said, everybody looks like a private in that sense, but we know he had the flu real bad then. But then after that, he's, Côte de Châtillon, he's at the lines when they go through the wire. He's in the back after that, but that's right within the realm of fire. And then at Sedan, he gets captured on the field by the 1st Division guys because he's just out there in the middle of nowhere, and he looks like a German officer. So
he's in a lot of combat.
He's in everything, and like we always say, the goofy thing is, he never said I did this or I did this. It's everybody else. Wow, that guy was crazy.
And the trench raid. I mean, probably more than a dozen. Instances of.
Well, and all those citations are for bravery. It's not for standing around
or being smart.
Yeah.
Okay. So, next question then, changing course a little bit. So this is about Louise Cromwell Brooks, MacArthur's first wife. The question is, did MacArthur keep in touch with Louise's children from an earlier marriage?
Yeah, I don't know. We know that they were really close. During the time, we have all those letters. Louise says, she's just miserable. But she does talk about how he's devoted to them. And, later on, she'll look, in the last part of her life, she'll look at it as the happiest time of her life. So I think that they were pretty well acquainted with each other. There's no letters that I've ever found from Walter, the son, Brooks. But when Jean goes to Palm Beach in the 1980s, Walter goes to visit her with his wife, And so I think that they did have a, because I think MacArthur taught Walter how to ride a horse when they were in the Philippines, and things like that. So no, I would have imagined that they would write, but that goes back to, does MacArthur keep those letters for the public? Does he just throw them in with the collection, or is that something special to him?
And I guess there was never any idea of him adopting them because they have a father.
I mean, their mom was, still there. She said she didn't have much of a connection to them in those letters. So it's.
But she didn't have a very middle class upbringing, but he did.
Yeah.
And I feel like at that time in history, a more middle class upbringing is more family, related, children, parents, and that's how he grew up.
And we know he wanted that family, so I think he was probably very good to them.
All right, next question. How did General Douglas MacArthur's working relationship with the Joint Chiefs of Staff influence his strategic decisions and actions during the Korean War?
Well, as everybody knows, the JCS, that's the main problem, is the JCS and MacArthur not being on the same page in the Korean War. The thing is all those guys are Eisenhower guys, Bradley, Collins, Vandenberg. MacArthur knows Sherman from World War II. Sherman likes MacArthur and agrees with him a lot. Like when they had those congressional hearings, Sherman was the only one that was really, looking at the MacArthur plan of blockading the Chinese coast and things like that, and looking at it,
objectively.
Yes, yes. But the thing is before the war breaks out, they're not on the same page as far as the peace treaty in Japan, as well as demilitarization, because the JCS wants the Japanese to remilitarize, 49 on, because of the Soviets, and they also wanted to turn, I think, Okinawa back over to the Japanese, and MacArthur is not for that. He thinks that was won by the war, and they should be able to use it as long as they need to for the littoral defense. And so MacArthur was really siding more with the State Department than he was with the JCS during those times up to the war. War comes along, they're not for Incheon, but they allow him to pull it off, and then it's like they're scared to voice opposition to him. Even when they get on the Chongchon River and the Chinese come in that first time, they're saying, we should hold on, and MacArthur's like, this is what's happening. We're going to do this and we're going to do that, and they're like, are you using American troops up by the border, which he wasn't supposed to do, and he's like, yeah, but we have to, and they don't counter him on that,
Right.
And it's not until the Chinese come in full force that the JCS then kind of finally asserts its authority, basically, over MacArthur. And they are not, they want to get out of the war. They want to go back status quo antebellum, and MacArthur wants to win the thing.
Right.
And as late as March of 1951, he's sending plans of how they can win the war, and so which is totally against any ideas they have, because they're looking to get out of the thing. So I don't think that they influenced his strategical decisions much at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he thought.
Well, they didn't in World War II either.
Yeah.
Right? I mean.
Well, back then though the communications weren't as instant as they are. Because
By
now
the
you got the
50s.
telecons, and the JCS want to talk to him every night, and MacArthur will just like all of a sudden, that's all, sign off, and they're like waiting for something else, and nothing else is coming through. MacArthur's left the building. It's kind of like Elvis, or something like that.
I forgot about that.
And so I think he doesn't like that. He looks back to the days of Dewey.
Right.
I'm cutting the cable, and I'll be in control out here.
Right.
So I think in that sense, the time when he was a general and into the modern times had passed him by in that sense. And so it's really not until after the Chinese come in that they do assert their dominance over him.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's see. Next question. Was he aware of Father Emil Kapaun? He was a chaplain during the Korean War who died in a POW camp.
Yeah, and helped so many people. Helped so many prisoners
Medal of
war.
Honor recipient.
Yeah. We had a prisoner of war that was here that first made me aware of this guy. But I never found, I'm sure that people probably wrote MacArthur about him, but I haven't found it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that as of yet. So I don't know of any connection to them, or MacArthur would have had to have signed well, not really, because that would have been after the war that they figured all that out. But
he gets
I'm not
the Medal
sure.
of Honor, 10 years
Yeah,
ago?
like
Or
posthumously.
5 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
So very recently.
And we've had some other POWs that sent articles, about him as well.
All right, next question. Did FDR, Stimson, and Marshall explicitly approve MacArthur's plan to defend the Philippines on the beaches? Why didn't experienced soldiers like Marshall and Stimson recognize that this plan was unrealistic?
Well, they did. They all gave the approval to it. The thing is they're it's not only MacArthur that thinks the Japanese won't invade till April of 1942. That's the War Department's G2 position, is that the Japanese won't be able to put this thing together until that time frame. And they're all thinking he's going to have, 250 bombers by then. He's going to have hundreds of planes. It wasn't so much, the defending on the beaches as using all those Filipinos that had no training or, weren't very good at all. It's like Grunert said, you should have had the Philippine division as a reserve, thing behind him maybe, and then working up to the beaches, because that would have been the, U.S. 31st, the Philippine Scouts, and that's what were the best troops that MacArthur has there, and they also had more firepower. And so I think it's not so much the defending on the beaches as who he's using, and I think that the War Department doesn't counter it because they believe he's going to have all this stuff by then,
All right. Next question. Given General MacArthur's love of West Point, did he struggle with the decision he made not to be buried there?
No, it was instantaneous. As soon as they said Norfolk wants to have everything, a museum and archives with all your papers, they said MacArthur didn't even have to think about it. He was like, "Yeah, I like that idea," and that's what both Duckworth, the mayor of Norfolk, and Roy Martin, who then became mayor after Duckworth said. They were in there and they said, "This will be the biggest thing Norfolk ever has." And they said MacArthur's eyes were just like, "Yeah, I like that idea." And once he saw the city hall,
It's impressive.
yeah. So no, I don't think he had any qualms about it at all.
Not even, even just forgetting West Point, but you think about his parents in Arlington. Nothing. I guess you can't have a museum there.
Yeah.
So this was the full package here in Norfolk. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he thought it was weird, to be buried in the middle of a museum. And he also thought it was very morbid to come visit a place where you're going to be buried, and that's just what he thought, so, I mean...
But he wanted it.
But he wanted it, yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. All right. Did John F. Kennedy and MacArthur talk about the Soviet nukes in Cuba in August 1962? And did MacArthur give advice to JFK that was later used 2 months later? The blockade idea.
Oh, advice about blockading Cuba? I looked at that. I saw that question come in, so I went back to those transcripts of that meeting between Kennedy and MacArthur. There was no transcript of the meeting in April, right after...
Okay. When Kennedy comes to see
right
him.
after Bay of Pigs, yeah, when he sees him at the Waldorf. We don't know what they said about there. Now, when MacArthur comes in August of 62, and I think it's right before they do the Thanks of Congress award, and MacArthur goes to see him, and they spend about an hour together. They talked about politics. They talked about Asia a lot, especially about how to get the Chinese out of the Vietnam Indochina sphere, and they talked a lot about dropping guerrillas on the shore of China from Taiwan. They talked a lot about MacArthur had an idea for this nuclear cartridge that one soldier could carry, and he could fire it like 200 yards and eliminate like a regiment, in front of him. And so MacArthur was really talking about this atomic gun thing the whole time.
There's something like that in Age of Empires. It's a cheat code.
And then, he does talk about a blockade, but he's talking about if the Soviets and the Chinese moved into India, and and you could blockade them. And he talked about if like World War III comes, the missile thing will play itself out. The air forces will probably neutralize each other, and then it's going to come down to the Navy, and it's all about blockades. They don't talk about Cuba at all, in that message. But maybe Kennedy gets that blockade thing, but I think a lot of his Navy leaders are probably telling him that as well.
Yeah.
But MacArthur thinks that's the most effective weapon they're ever going to have against anything. Because of America's Navy at that time. Because there was nobody that could challenge the American Navy in the 1960s.
What countries did MacArthur visit as chief of staff from 1930 to 1935? And I think one of the questions that people have had about these trips is, did he meet Hitler or any other German official that was later involved in World War II? Because he did tell Eichelberger at one point that he met Hitler. Yeah,
he did. And we know he goes to France and Austria and Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, Poland, because he meets a lot of those great leaders there. So it's a lot of those countries that had kind of not really allied with Germany, but like Hungary, Romania, they were all, in that sphere in World War I. And he's going to check out, he goes to Turkey as well. But we don't have any official, there's no photographs of him, with German officials. There's no kind of official documents that say he goes to these other places. We have letters from the French when he goes over there and he writes about wanting to have certain people, be with him that he knew in the war. And so, and then there's, letters with him and the Czechoslovakian group he sees. There's letters between him and other groups in Yugoslavia that he meets. And then we know that he meets with Kemal Ataturk in Turkey. So we have records of all these other places he goes because there's so many pictures. But, there's only one portrait I've seen of MacArthur where it says on the bottom of it, or it said on the back of it, Berlin. But it's such a famous picture of him as chief of staff that I don't think that was taken in Berlin, but I mean it could have been, and I mean, could he have met Hitler? Yeah, sure, he could have, but there's nothing we have here that points to that. Of him going there, to Germany.
And what do we make of it then? When he tells people like Eichelberger, "I met Hitler."
That's what I mean.
He exaggerating?
I learned 30 years ago never say no, because somebody
know.
could come tomorrow. MacArthur was at dinner here with us, in 1932 or 33. The thing is, though, is like, is Hitler's not. I mean, I guess the 33 he's made chancellor. But I don't know. What was the month of that?
Would the Chancellor of Germany meet the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army?
Probably, but
you're at least talking about some of the other military officials. Probably would have had to. It's their counterpart. So who knows?
No, I don't know. It's just
inconclusive.
Nobody's ever put in any book.
You would have thought he would have put that in his autobiography.
Sure.
I met this guy and I thought he was a lunatic.
And it was Hitler.
Yeah. And I knew in 1935 that he was.
Right.
And if you guys would have listened to me about Blitzkrieg and all this, I could have saved you all a lot of trouble.
Because that's what he said. That's what he talks about in that thing with Eichelberger, that Eichelberger writes down, that I was outside the office and listened to them talk about tank warfare, and so you're like, maybe.
Well,
but I don't know. I mean,
we could get a collection in another week that'll answer.
Definitely going to get yelled at, for doubting it.
We go by what the sources say, so we'll see. So it's still unclear about that. All right, last question then, and this was submitted by a good friend of ours, Charlie Knight. He says,
"Here we go.
I still want to know about MacArthur's secret alien files."
Of course he does.
And you would be surprised, but he is not the only person that asks us about MacArthur and what he knew about UFOs and aliens. So take it away, Jim.
He makes all those speeches, even Duty on Our Country speech. He says, I see one day where the world might have to unite against a sinister alien force. And he says that there. He says it in Manila. I think he has one other speech he says it. And then in 55 or 54, Achille Lauro, who is it, mayor of Naples or something like that, came to see MacArthur in New York at the Waldorf Astoria. And when he came out, there's a whole New York Times article that Lauro said all he talked about was being attacked by aliens. There's other people that said MacArthur saw a UFO at Clark Field in 45. But we don't know. I found a bunch of Air Force logs of UFOs being sighted in Japan, post-war. But
a lot of people you would consider just, very level-headed, especially during World War II and beyond, all had experiences where they thought they saw something flying around that they couldn't identify. So, it's not unusual, but people really seem to, I think because MacArthur's so interested in space, people ask us that a lot.
Yeah. We had the guy come that wanted to, know if he knew about the lizard people that ran Antarctica, which the Nazis had made allies with during the war. And so we get a lot of that, I didn't know anything about the lizard people, though.
No. But some people are quite serious in their questions. What did he know about things like that? And what were his thoughts? So...
and once again, there could be lizard people. I'm not going to say there aren't, but, I don't know.
Right. So again, another one that, sources are still kind of emerging, but things like that. So, all right. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Do you want to do one more question?
If you would like to, Amanda.
Okay. How about let's go back a little further back in MacArthur history, MacArthur family history. What was Arthur MacArthur and then Douglas MacArthur's opinion of Frederick Funston?
Well, they thought he was the king. Funston's a man of action. They like that kind of guy. And they knew him as being capable. Arthur MacArthur especially, looked at him as one of his, finest commanders in the Philippines at that time. He was slated to run the AEF in World War I, but he had a heart attack right when they were going to choose him. I think he's probably one of the greatest influences on Douglas MacArthur. I mean, that whole Veracruz thing, I think, is all because of Funston.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to grab a bull by the horns, and I'm going to do this myself, and this will all play out just like it did for Fred Funston. And so, especially when MacArthur gets there and Funston's in control, and he'd probably met him before, but he's like, I'm going to show this guy,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just as good as he is,
Mm-hmm.
So I
Very good opinion of him.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all for now.
Okay.
So thank you everybody for all the questions you submitted. I think we should do a Q&A 4 at some point. Maybe before the end of the year.
Okay, but then don't tell me the questions. And I'll just
All
say,
right.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right. Well, keep your questions coming, and thank you all for joining us today.